Welcome guys to the third episode of Reading and Understanding Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Today we'll be looking at conjunction function. So what the hell does this even mean? There are 4 key conjunction words on the card which affects the card effects themselves. So these 4 keywords are then, also, and if you do, and. So we'll be breaking down all these 4 keywords and showing how the card effects can be affected by chaining. So from the previous 2 episodes, we looked at the condition, activation, and then the 2 separate monster types of where you can chain, and now we move into the keywords inside of the card effects. If you haven't checked out the 2 videos, they're both linked in the description down below, and as always, we'll be using examples from the official Yu-Gi-Oh rulebook. So let's get right into it. Alright, so the first thing that we have to know is, why is timing important? So certain trigger effects and fast effects have to be used in response to a trigger event, like a monster being destroyed or a summoning happening. Depending on how your card is written, it might only be usable in response to triggering an event that was the last thing that happened. This is usually the case for cards that can be used when something happens. So we'll be talking about that more, and just understanding that timing is very important, along with what was the last thing that even happened. We'll be breaking it down into digestible parts, because this topic it's really not that easy. This is really a advanced topic that confuses a lot of players to this day. So why are these key parts even important to understand? Well, naturally, when you activate a card, you expect things to work perfectly, but sometimes your opponent chains a card of their own that changes things, and suddenly you can't do anything your card says. So, like, how much can you even do? And, what are the key parts that makes this easy to understand what I can still activate and what I can't activate anymore? And also we're going to be looking at, towards the end of the video, is what can you even chain to? Because there's some things you cannot chain to, and it's not explained on the cards, and this is why we're going to be looking at this properly and understanding what are the key elements that makes cards easier to negate or harder to negate. So the first keyword we'll be looking at is then. So how then works is basically like the alphabet. So B comes after A. So if you know your alphabet, it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So how this works is A is required for B, but not vice versa. So A is everything that's written before the then, and B is everything that's written after the then. So if you can do part A, you move on to part B. If you can't do part A, you cannot do part B. But they're not connected. So if I, for whatever reason, can play part A, but I can't do part B anymore, it doesn't matter, A still goes through. So what I mean with this is, if we look at this card for an example, it says here, when your opponent declares an attack, so now comes part A, special summon 1 beast monster from your hand, then part B, and the battle phase. So what I meant before is, what is the last action that happens? Well, the last action that happens is ending the battle phase. So here we have to understand the timing of things. So after the card resolves, the last thing that happened was ending the battle phase, as mentioned before. The last thing was not a monster being summoned, which means neither player can activate cards like Torrential Tribute that activates when a monster is summoned. So this can get really confusing, and this is why we're trying to understand what these words even mean. So summoning a beast is required to end the battle phase. If you can't summon for some reason, then you don't end the battle phase. Like, let's say your opponent activates a card that he chains afterwards with something that causes you to discard the only beast you had in hand. You can't summon it anymore, so you stop resolving this card effect, and you just reach the I cannot do that part anymore. So if the first part doesn't go through, the second part doesn't go through. So now you kind of know what to react to and what to chain to. Here you want to make sure that you target everything that's written before the then. Because if you stop anything that happens before the then, everything after the then can't go through. But you have to make sure you read where the monster comes from. So it comes from hand. And we talked about this in the previous episode. So if you're a little bit unsure about these things, I suggest you go to episode 2 and have a look there. I really explain it properly where you can target what. So moving on to also. So also is considered as simultaneously. So A and B happen at the same time. So here, neither of the two are required. You can just do as much as you can. So what I mean with that is, in then, we learned that A has to happen for B. And here, it really doesn't matter. Look, anything that happens before also or after also, just do what you can do. So it doesn't really matter what your opponent chains to or negates. They both go through at the same time, not after each other, at the same time. So this can get a little bit confusing. So this card here makes it a bit hard to understand. So this card says, once per turn, if you control a face-up ninja monster other than Masked Ninja, you can activate this effect. So this is part A that says, return a number of your opponent's spell trap cards to the hand equal to the number of ninja monsters you control. And then also, so at the same time, every face-up Galliant Ninja you control can attack your opponent directly this turn. So everything after the colon, everything written in blue, happens at the same time. If either player has an effect that can be activated when cards are returned to the hand, they can use it immediately after this effect resolves. Even though the text regarding the Geo is mentioned after the text when it returns the cards, it happens simultaneously. So the cards bounce and you do direct damage. So neither of these effects are required for the other. What that means is if you wind up not returning any spell traps to the hand, you can still attack directly. Also, if you don't have them on field, it doesn't matter, the first part still resolves. Just apply as much of the effect as you can. Anything that says also just means either or. Just do either or, it doesn't matter, just do whatever you can do. So that's the difference between also and then. Then is required A after B, also doesn't really care, but they happen at the same time, not after each other, at the same time. And if one doesn't go through, the other one still goes through. They're basically like buddies. It's like, okay, if you don't manage to go through, I'll go through for you. So they're team tagging on this one. So if we move on to and if you do. So and if you do is seen as a add-on. So these are also considered simultaneously, both happen also at the same time. But the thing is, A is required for B, but not vice versa. So if A doesn't happen, then stop, and B cannot happen. So this is similar to then, and the difference is between this is if you do A, you don't necessarily have to do B. It's your choice to do B. Nobody's forcing you to do it. It's like, yeah, and if you do, then you can also go and do that. It's literally, it's like a choice. You can literally see it as an add-on. But A has to go through for you to choose if you want to do B. So here in this card, it says here, when your opponent's monster declares an attack, you take damage equal to the attacking monster's attack, and if you do, banish that monster. So you first have to take damage to be able to banish it, but if you don't want to banish it, I don't know why you wouldn't want to, but if you don't, you don't have to. It's your choice if you want to do it. But it all happens at the same time. So the second you take damage, you banish that monster. So it's basically hand in hand, but you have the choice of doing it. It doesn't happen after each other, it happens at the same time. So here, the timing when this effect resolves, taking damage and banishing the monster happen at the same time. Effects can be activated that happen when you take damage, and effects can be activated that happen when the monster is banished or leaves the field. So, you have to take damage in order to banish. If you can't take damage because there's another effect that prevents it, you cannot banish the monster. So it's basically saying A has to happen for B, but if A happens, you don't necessarily have to do B. If you choose to do B, they both happen at the same time, and you can activate, so you can chain to A and B in this case. But we'll be looking at that a little bit closer towards the end of the video, so you actually understand, what's important to chain to and what can I actually not chain to. So for the last one, we have and I'm just putting this out there, and is super rare. You don't really see that anymore. Most of the cards have been reprinted, and what makes and different from everybody else is that they are both required. In the other ones, it was kind of like, I need this or I need that. It doesn't really matter, but and they come together. So if you cannot do both, then you can't do anything. So there used to be, like I said, a lot more cards written, and the phrasing has been now changed to "and if you do," which is a lot more accurate. And it's pretty rare now to see and like I said, they are joined at the hip. So it's all or nothing. Everything is required. It's basically like a deal with the devil. You have to do one to do the other one. It doesn't work any other which way. So here, if we look at this card for an example, it says, when this card is on the field, it is destroyed by card effects. Well, it has no XYZ materials. You can special summon one number 92 from your extra deck and attach it to this card from the graveyard. So basically what it says is here, if my opponent removes it from the graveyard, I can't attach it and the whole effect doesn't go through. So here the timing is special summoning number 92 and attaching it to number 53 as an XYZ material, and it happens at the same time. So you have to do both. If number 53 was removed from the graveyard with a chain effect, you cannot do the summoning of number 92. So yeah, it's basically a contract. You need part A to do part B, you need part B to do part A. If either of them get stopped by a chain, well, kind of tough luck. There's not much you can do about it. So these were the 4 separate parts. The part we'll be looking at is if there's multiple keywords in one card. Nowadays, the new meta cards do have that. They have multiple sentences in one card that use like 2 or 3 of these keywords, so it gets really confusing. So we'll be looking at an easy card that says, when this card is fusion summoned, you can target one monster your opponent controls, destroy that target, also destroy this card. Then if both monsters were destroyed, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the attack of the monster in the graveyard that was targeted by this effect. So what the hell does any of this mean with also and then? Well, then becomes a contract with also. So if we know one thing about also is, and whether you have to destroy the target or destroy this card, it doesn't matter. Also chooses both of them, but then has the entire sentence. Then wants to destroy this card and the target, because it says there, if both monsters were destroyed, then you can inflict the damage. So if you break that down, the key parts of also is destroy the target if possible, destroy Volcanon if possible. He doesn't really care, but then says, after you've destroyed any monster, check to see if you destroyed both, because the next thing that happens is you can inflict damage. Now, then tells us if you destroy both monsters, but a lot of times it's not very clear, so then it needs A to go through for B. So that's just something that we have to pay attention to. I'll be talking more about meta-related cards in the blog, and also how you can chain to them properly. So the last part is the takeaway, understanding the 4 differences. If you didn't understand it in the slides, I hope this here is much easier. So then it's like the alphabet. B comes after A. So they come after each other, not simultaneously. A is required for B, If A doesn't happen, stop. But if A resolves, you can play B. It's okay, A still goes through. So yeah, if B doesn't go through, it's fine, A still goes through. Also, this is the difference, it all happens simultaneously. If one of the effects doesn't go through, who cares? Just apply as much as you can. There's no strings attached. Also is such a chill dude. He's like, I don't really care, just do either which one, doesn't bother me. And if you do is similar to then, but you can see it as an add-on. So if you do A, you can do B, it's optional, but it happens at the same time. It's not like then that happens after each other, it happens at the same time. And is the devil's deal, where they are both required, they are joined at the hip. If you can't do B, you can't do A. If you can't do A, you can't do B. Now if we want to look at this at chaining purposes, just look at the yellow parts. So we start again by then, like the alphabet. B comes after A. It comes after each other, not simultaneously. So make sure you stop A. Everything before then the effect cannot resolve. So if you see there's then, target the part before then you just stop the card from happening. Also, it happens all simultaneously. If one of the effects doesn't go through, who cares? No strings attached. So here in Willow, what you have to do is negate both effects if you somehow miraculously can, or just banish the card. If there's a way for you to just negate the whole card, do it, because also is a tricky one to chain to. And if you can't negate both of the effects, just make sure to negate the effect that does damage to you the most. And if you do, it's the same as then, except for it happens at the same time, not apart from each other, and B is optional. So negate everything before, and if you do, to stop the card effect. And is just negate one of the effects, then it just stops it from resolving, because and is tied together. And like I said, you don't see and that much anymore. Most of the old cards that had and have been replaced with and if you do. So this is basically the whole keywords and understanding them. Some of them are easier to negate. I would say the then and if you do and are the easiest to negate, because you just have to target everything before the sentence. And also, also is both of them. There you just have to choose, what do you really, really want to stop. So basically just remember is the different keywords serve different purposes depending on whether you're checking to see what the last thing is that happened. So that's very important for then, because then is always the last thing that happened. You have to look, before then, what is even happening. Can I negate that? Then is quite tricky with that, but again, in the blog, I'll be giving examples to the new meta so you can actually understand if you're ever in that situation, what can you do? And if you're trying to see how much of the effect you can do, just break down the 3 words and always look, does A need to happen so that B can resolve? So if you're looking for things, usually focus on then for activation purposes, over, and also on if you do. If you're checking to see how much of the effect you can do, check for also, because also allows you to do whatever. Then is a bit tricky because, like said, if you summon a monster to activate B's effect, you cannot negate the summon. That's the problem. You have to stop where the summon is coming from. So that's where, it gets a little bit tricky. But anyways, guys, I hope this was informational and you learned a little bit more. If not, I recommend that you go back and read through the slides. This is a hard topic. It's not that easy to understand. And like I said, in the blog, I'll be going through more of these that are a bit more meta related. But anywho, thank you so much for watching. I love you guys lots, and I will catch you next week for the next episode. Alright, bye!